Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Just in Time Cafe. I'm Tracy O'Rourke, co-founder of the Just in Time Cafe, and I'm going to be your host today. And if you have never been to the cafe before, you are in for a treat. I'm really excited about today's webinar because it's being done and presented by Antonio Nava from UC San Diego. And the title is Map Your Processes to Unite Silos and Drive Success. How are you today, Tony?
I am well and excited and nervous, but happy to share some stories with everyone today.
No reason to be nervous. You are a natural. So I'll tell you a little bit about Tony before we get started. He serves as the Senior Strategic Programs Manager at UC San Diego. He joined the team in 2018. He manages the Lean Six Sigma Yellow Belt certification and the lead trainer and administrator for ProMap. And he was awarded, this is so cool, you were awarded the 2021 UC San Diego Exemplary Staff Employee of the Year. Congratulations. I knew you always rocked, but I guess a lot of people feel that way.
I don't know about that. I bribed a lot of people, I think, to get that. That's what happened.
All right, a little bit more about Tony. He is a black belt. He regularly facilitates cross-departmental and cross-institutional projects, pro-site change management, and LSS methodologies to support change initiatives. He also delivers campus-wide efforts to support lean initiatives and business best practices through BCOP, the Business Excellence Community of Practice at UC San Diego. And Tony does have his Bachelor of Arts in Theater, which is super cool, and love to know more about that. And you got that at UC San Diego, and you have completed some master's coursework in organizational management from Ashford University. Welcome, Tony. So excited.
Thank you for having me today.
Yes. So we are going to just cover a few housekeeping notes before we begin. You can ask any questions anytime. Just enter them into the chat window. And there's also a question area, but if you can, please use the chat window, although I will check just in case, because sometimes people are used to using the question area. This is going to be available for free on the Just in Time Cafe website after this webinar is over. We generally post by Monday of the following week. And so we typically ask where you're from because we usually have people coming from all over the world. As a matter of fact, one person is calling in from India already. But today we're going to mix it up a little bit. And we're going to ask you to share what was your first job ever. And so let's see what people have said. So first, before we do that, Tony, what was your first job ever?
I worked at Hollywood Video. So for those of you who don't know, that was a place where people would go before Netflix to pick out movies and then take them home to watch them. And yes, people would rush to the store at midnight and try to return their movies before they were late and incurred horrible late fees, not knowing that they could have returned them as late as 8 the following morning. They still would have been considered on time technically. So I miss it. It was so fun, that job.
That is so cool. I love that. My very first job was at Jack in the Box. And that helped me a lot because I understood the whole fast food industry went from push to pull. And so it was really interesting to participate in that and watch that happen. I mean, it didn't last that very long. It was only 3 months, thank God. Okay, so we've got a few people. Fasai says he was an industrial engineer. Well, that's way cooler than working at Jack in the Box. Larry, you worked as a steel mill supervisor after college. Katie, she worked in her dad's dental office as a coordinating assistant. Let's see, what else? Kathy was a quality assurance supervisor at a feed mill. Esther was a tutor. Carol was a receptionist at the psych department. Virginie was selling parcels of land for her mom. No one showed up. Bummer. And then we have Gary, who is a stalker at a liquor store, could not be a cashier since he was 16. And we have an aviation electrical systems troubleshooter. Carl's Jr., right, Kelsey, you're in line with me, fast food. A paper boy, a telemarketer at a newspaper. If you don't count babysitting, my first taxable job was a hostess at KFC. Nice one, Jennifer. What is that? KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken? Do they have hostesses? Okay, didn't know that. Diana was a dog washer. That must be cool. And we've got many, many more. I don't know if you want to read any more of these, Tony.
I mean, I love seeing them. One of my favorites that I've ever seen was a exploded document collector. Basically, a building had exploded, and they hired people to go collect the documents that had strewn about the land. And I was like, that's so cool. I wanted to say though, I love this question. I love it for so many reasons, but particularly when we're talking about process improvement and process mapping, really getting back to like, what was it like on your first day, right? When you were bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, you didn't have the tribal knowledge, you didn't have the assumptions or the restrictions of policy. And what's best is you didn't have, like, you were empowered to ask why, like, why do we do it this way? And how are we doing things? And a lot of that comes really well in line with what we're going to talk about today.
Oh, nice. Very nice. Thank you for that. Okay, just a few announcements. Then I'm going to hand it over to you, Tony, because I know everybody's chomping at the bit to hear what you have to say about silos and processes. So before I let Tony take the stage, I'm going to cover just a few things. One is we do have another upcoming webinar. It will be our first 2023 webinar on January 26th with Jennifer Tankenow. She is going to be talking about communication systems, which we all know that is still a challenge in some organizations. And I'm sure that's also related to what Tony's talking about today. So Jennifer Tankenow, she's the president of Joint Pivot, co-founder and president. She worked at Toyota for many years. She brings her lean sensibility to the business world. She's a teacher, a leader, a facilitator. She helps people understand the Toyota production system, which is great. And in summary, this webinar is going to cover communication systems and how they drive engagement, support a lean culture, and it is a system. So identifying what is broken about a system, what's working in a system, and what we can do about that. So looking forward to that. And then I'll just have one more announcement, and that is about our latest podcast. So we have our latest episode 85 is out, and we highlight the effervescent Billy Ray Taylor, and he discusses his new book, The Winning Link. I love this guy. I've seen him at AME many times. He's very charismatic, plain spoken, operational excellence world leader. He used to work at Goodyear as the chief diversity officer, and he retired. And guess what? That didn't last very long. It got short-circuited by his amazing ability to help people build high-performing cultures. So he started consulting business, wrote a book, and you'll have to listen to the podcast to hear the rest. So that's just all my announcements, not too much. So let's get to it. I'm going to hand it over to Tony to talk about silos, processes, and an approach and mindset to help organizations manage them.
It's a tall order. I'll do what I can to deliver as much of that as possible. Welcome, everyone. I wish I could see everyone's lovely faces. But hopefully this reaches you. Hopefully it can reach through the screen and give you a big hug. All right. I want to start by saying I've never seen a perfect process, but I have seen and felt imperfect ones, as I'm sure you all have. Now, messy processes can play a major role in staff attrition, lack of engagement, and poor deliverables. And with so many fires, we just want things to get better, right? But what's the first step in process improvement? Like, where do we start? I believe it's to build a shared understanding of our process, not beginning with hard skills like process mapping, data collection, but with our soft skills of introspection, active listening, and empathy. Right? The keys for today's journey that are that you should capture and tell your story, basically, and that you should really listen to the stories of others, and that this is an essential starting point when considering any type of change. So I'll start by telling you a story. My first grown-up job was with a university in an administrative role. It was very procedure-driven, very policy-driven, very methodical, and very siloed. It was so siloed, in fact, that the team that sat in the cubicles next to mine, pretty much doing the same exact role, but servicing a different population of students, they wouldn't discuss how their process differed. They would tell me things like, it's just different. You wouldn't understand. There's more complexity. I couldn't shake this feeling that it wasn't that different. And what about the steps before and after mine, right? Where does this information that I'm working with, where does it come from? And when I'm done, where does it go? And why do I fill it out in this particular way? I really just wanted to understand, right, what I was doing and why, more importantly, the why of why I was doing it. Tensions were high between the units. And each group saw the others as the cause for delays and dysfunctions. Now, I wasn't a business analyst, right? I had just come from Pizza Hut. I didn't know mapping techniques. I was an individual contributor, and I was just looking for answers. So ultimately, I decided to do something crazy, something apparently nobody had tried before. I had a conversation with people from other departments. Now, at the time, we were in an 11-story building, and it was interesting because I eventually noticed that even our elevators were siloed. There were folks stationed on the first and second floors, right? Their first, second, third floors. And if they used the elevators, they were looked at kind of like, why didn't you just use the stairs, dude? So they were like kind of judged as being lazy if they ever got in an elevator. So floors 4 to 8 pretty much had priority usage of most of the elevators. Now there was a special elevator that sped folks right up to the top 3 floors. They pretty much bypassed the 8 floors entirely. Now, to get a real conversation started, I had to do something that was like unthinkable. I had to go to a floor that wasn't my familiar home of the 3rd floor. Right? So the land I had known was relatively quiet. There was some chatter, some policies and transfer credit discussion, bland color palettes. The best way to describe what I experienced when I got out of the elevator onto the 7th floor was culture shock. The doors opened and I was flooded with conversations and music and bell ringing, literally bells ringing, followed by cheers. Yay! Right? It was weird for me. Right? It was just complete shock. I even like the smell of the scents, right? The scents and the smells in the air were different. I could smell pizza and donuts that were undevoured and shared in the break rooms. It was jarring. It was like a completely different university. It was then something clicked in my mind. The culture shock I was experiencing was because it was a different culture, right? Yeah, it's kind of obvious, but for some reason it had eluded me and everyone else there. It was like saying gravity makes things fall. Like we all know it from experience, but we haven't really thought about it or its implications until a certain point, right? Each culture has its own language, its own celebration rituals, its own hierarchy, its own practices, its own art. And apparently so did each floor of that building. So I started thinking about this in terms of cultural immersion, right? In the same way that, a person could take a few semesters of Spanish class or go to a Spanish-speaking country and spend 2 weeks there. I spent time sitting with folks as they completed their work, simply to hear and observe. I invited them to view my processes and hear about my experiences, about what I did all day, what our frustrations were, how we measured success. I wasn't trying to get them to be like us. I wasn't trying to get them to change what they were doing or to judge. I was there to learn and to share, trying to get at the why and not just the how of our processes, right? And eventually that made us each more effective in our roles. It was like some weird magic secret that we had. Now we found, among other things, that sometimes our department would use a phrase, and that same phrase would have a completely different meaning for the other groups. So in this policy-focused singular space that was our university, our language was not universal, right? So I returned to my homeland, and my coworkers shared that they were literally scared for my safety, fearing that I had been mauled off by angry aggressors from far off lands. I'd return to my quiet workspace and often hear folks grumble about the challenges and things that are going wrong in the processes and having to deal with the other departments. And I realized how much of that was just a misalignment, a misunderstanding, misinterpretation, an assumption. And these things were leading to what I now know as process waste. A big part of me that drove me was that I didn't want to feel robotic, right? I had felt almost dispensable. I felt disconnected from the mission, and it felt like everyone else around me was just an other, right? They were a hindrance or a roadblock, a set of robots. And maybe if they had worked harder, this wouldn't be a problem, or they just need to be retrained, right? And it was really detrimental. It was an us versus them. I started learning and really feeling that these were people. Weird, right? They were similarly frustrated, and they just wanted things to be better. There were not people who were actively destroying the system. This was the world that they lived in. So this group, this cohort that we built, that started learning about what each other's experience was, we were the first there to reclaim our identities as people doing work and not just as workers. I'll rewind the clock back a little bit and tell you a different story. Now, in my senior year at UC San Diego, I had participated in a class provided by the Intergroup Relations program. And eventually I became a facilitator for the same set of offerings. Now, this class brought together students and staff from varying identities and backgrounds and focused on creating a dialogue, specifically a dialogue. So these were typically a quarter long, and they would focus on tense issues, often things about race, things about gender identity, for example. Now, in a debate, you're often trying to prove that you're right. In an argument, you're trying to prove the other person is wrong. In a dialogue, each participant approaches this discussion with the goal of sharing their experience and learning about the experience of others. You're there to learn. And if your mindset changes afterwards, great. But really the goal is to just take some time, set down your assumptions, and just share your perspectives. So during the dialogue sessions, it was really important that we first set ground rules for the discussions. Things such as one person speaking at a time, you practice using I statements, you practice active listening, and critically important were also these principles: suspending judgment, listening, inquiring, and exploring assumptions. Now, I see these principles as well aligned with Lean Six Sigma, and I believe that this really should be the foundation of any method of process improvement. Sometimes we seek change in our process because we want to, or our process feels janky, maybe we want to find a better way. Sometimes we look for change because we have to. Maybe there's a policy or something is forcing us to act. But too often, our hair is on fire and we make hasty changes in isolation. That just increases tensions, your relationships suffer, and we often create new problems, in turn requiring more quick fixes, right? Now, if we take some time to create a dialogue and to generate a shared understanding of our current state, rather than aiming for an argument or a debate at promoting a quick idea, then there's a greater chance of seeing real process change. But larger than that, over time, you'll see a culture change. Now, there's lots of methodologies out there, lots of approaches. This being a lean focus group, hopefully you'll be mostly familiar with Lean Six Sigma. But I don't want to assume anything. So I want to start with the foundation. So I currently teach, as mentioned, Lean Six Sigma for UC San Diego staff. And the progression is white, yellow, green, black belt. So white belt is sort of you're introduced to the concepts, and yellow belts you get some hands-on, black belt and green belt you work on projects, that sort of thing. I don't want to assume. I want to set aside my assumptions. I want to not assume that everyone in this space has any exposure to Lean Six Sigma. So I'm going to give a really, really quick foundational set of concepts that I think play really well with dialogue and process mapping. So if you're hearing the sound of my voice right now, you're not quite going to get a white belt, maybe like a white bracelet. All right, here is the initial set of themes. The central, what I see is the central set of themes. No process is perfect. Practice continuous improvement. Don't jump to improve. Build quality into the process. Focus on value-added steps. Each of these I'll go through. Tracy says white bracelet. Yes, it's a white bracelet. Maybe a white ringlet or an anklet, whatever, however you want to use it. All right, this first piece. This tool set, this way of thinking, this methodology really can be applied to anything that we do because everything we do is a process, right? So even though it has roots in manufacturing, UCSD and other areas have proven that this can be applicable and can see real measurable change. Not only that, if everything we do is a process, I can apply this tool set, this methodology, this approach to anything that I do. I've done projects on doing a grocery run. I've seen projects on making a cake, and you see real, measurable, feelable outcomes. We can talk about those later if you want after the session. But really, this is sometimes we work with a team, and they'll say, "Well, we do stuff, but it's different every single time, so we don't really have a process." What they're really saying is we have a process, but it's not well understood. There's a lot of variation. It's not documented, and it's not in control, right? But that still is a process. There is still something there that you can discuss and capture. This one is about not beating yourself up for where you are and not getting stuck in analysis paralysis, right? The analogy here is the pebble in the shoe, right? If I'm hiking and there's a pebble in my shoe, it might not seem like a big issue at first. So if I decide to just keep going up the hill, by the time I'm at the top, I might have a big, painful spot in my foot, right? Might slow me down. So if I stop, take some time, and wriggle this little pebble out of my shoe, it will make the hike much more bearable, right? Those small improvements, those small changes, go for them, right? Don't necessarily wait for this home run idea that's going to change the world. Don't boil the ocean. We've heard these sort of phrases before. The best one that I've heard is, there's no best, there's only better, right? And we should be looking for a better way to do what we've been doing. That goes well with not jumping to improve. Often, like I said, we need an answer by yesterday. And so we skip a few steps. That's going to cost us. So really, with Lean Six Sigma, the two sort of major things that I've seen are DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, control, and PDSA or PDCA, plan, do, study, act, plan, do, check, act. And they both really start with a phase where you're taking time to really think about the current state, right? The define phase or the plan phase. This and many other process improvement approaches start with this idea that you shouldn't just find a solution and implement it, but take some time to understand what's actually happening to validate that, right? Building quality into the process is really important. It's often, it's difficult to do, right? So the way I like to think about this is, what's the worst possible outcome for our process, right? The worst possible outcome is that the person at the end of the process tells us that we messed up somewhere and we got to send it back and redo the whole thing all over again, right? So a little bit better than that would be for us to catch it at the end, right? Often we think of this as like a quality assurance step or something right before we get it out the gate to whomever we're delivering this to. One step better than that would be if you have sequential checks, right? In-stream checks, each operator can see if something needs to be improved or changed or fixed before it moves on. What's one step better than that? Is making it impossible to fail, right? We're human, we make mistakes, and there are ways, if we think creatively, that we can account for some of our humanity, right? And not just thinking that if we try harder, if we run faster, if we get stronger, that things are going to get better, right? Sometimes our processes are set up such that we don't have the specific resource we need. I don't have the information that I need, or we can think of some creative controls for our processes. This one is about thinking about what parts of your process move the ball forward. And often we can't figure this one out until we know the why in a step. So, one way to think about this is, if we stop doing any particular step, if I went left or right or straight, who would throw a flag on the field and why? Is that something that has any squish to it? And often we hear when we're doing these kinds of conversations as well, I mean, we've always done it that way. That's a great opportunity for potential process improvements, right? That tells you that there's probably some leeway there. Now, sometimes you'll also hear, oh, it's because of policy, we can't change that. Great. Can we read the policy? Is it still applicable? Are there other locations that have to adhere to the same policy that maybe we can learn from how they navigate this, right? So perhaps all of this sounds interesting, but you're saying, I just want to brainstorm solutions. I just want to get ideas on a whiteboard. Isn't that faster? Well, I'm glad you asked. In my experience, prior to joining UC San Diego and learning about Lean Six Sigma, my experience was that leaders want to hear solutions and not problems, right? If there was an issue, there might be directors and analysts, they'd meet, they'd brainstorm a solution, they'd think of that, and they would sort of push it down onto staff. what I love about this methodology of lean is that we're asked to stop and define a little bit. We're asked to create a problem statement. We're asked to not come with a solution, but with a good understanding, or at least a starting of an understanding of what the problem is, what the gap is, right? So what's really great about this is that if you're if you really think about the root cause, if you get to the point where you're thinking through, a good problem statement, you're going to prevent a lot of additional fires that you would be creating by trying to just fix by shooting straight to the solution, right? So maybe you're still not convinced. Let's make it real. So let's do a little thought exercise. There's X number of people hearing me right now. Even if you're watching the recording, please do this. I want you to think, close your eyes if it helps. Think about a process that you move through, personal, professional, whatever the case. Think about a process, pick one. I want you to think about what are the resources that you leverage. How often do you move through this process? Is it 5 times a day, 10 times a week? What is it? How much time does it take you to do this process and your steps in it? Right? Now, you likely came to these details fairly quickly and confidently. Now, I want you to continue thinking about that process, but think about who was the person just before you in the process flow? Or who was the person just after you? How much do you know about what's required of their steps? How much time does their process take? What are the challenges? What are their resources? How certain are you that this is the truth? Right? Move another step further out, upstream or downstream. The picture gets fuzzier the further you move away, right? Now, I'm not saying that everyone should know everything about everybody's role. That's not sensible, right? What I am saying is that we need to invest some amount of effort into dialogue, into process mapping, into the define phase, right? Rather than jumping straight into some kind of solution. All right, let's say you still don't believe me. Hey, you want to see a process. All right, let's talk about a process. I'm going to take a half step and I'm going to switch my shared screen real quick. Now, I created this process map, and it is about the home buying process. So for me, it should have been, I was hoping, pretty straightforward. If I can afford the house and we can cover the cost of the house, it should be that simple. I make an offer, find an agent, I get a loan, right? But there's other people involved in this process. There's an agent, there's a lender, there's a seller, there's a seller's agent. I mean, I kind of know what some of those people do, but they have people that are further upstream that they're relying on. They have people that are supporting them. They have people that are looping me in and out. There's a lot of fuzziness the further out I get. So how does this affect me, right? How does this, what does it matter in my home buying process? Let's say the lender over here thinks of some step they want to do in their process. And they think, well, if we do this, it'll make our process 5 more minutes, more quick. I was going to say more better. They're going to make their process 5 minutes more efficient, right? Without thinking about how that impacts the additional steps, without knowing what all is involved in my home buying process, or without considering what is all involved in the seller's part of the process, they unknowingly add 30 minutes to my process. Let's say they did something to make their credit check more efficient by 5 minutes and more accurate by 10%. Great. That actually means that I'm able to, I might miss the deadline, or I might not get approved for a loan that I would have otherwise been approved for, right? That means now that the seller gets fewer offers. Maybe that means that the person who's selling the house is going to get lower bids, less competitive bids, less options, less competition, right? So this 5-minute point efficiency ends up sort of ruining a lot of the system efficiency, right? Or let's say there's no process change. Let's say current state, everything is as it is. I'm the home buyer. I'm filling out the loan application. I would love to know more from the lender about their process because I'm curious about, and I was probing them on this. I was asking, what kinds of things do other home buyers get wrong? Like, what do they miss? I don't want to miss those things. I don't want to step on the same pitfalls that happen to other people. One of the things that we missed that we tried bringing up several times was the solar. I won't get into that, but it was a big to do. But those are the kinds of things where, like, if I just understood a little bit about the world that the lender was living in, it might make me a better home buyer. It might mean that I end up getting the house that I actually wanted instead of just one that I had to sort of, settle for. And it might mean better upstream or downstream, right? The seller might get more attractive offers and that sort of thing. So there's a lot that can be said about this one. But I really just wanted to show you a simple process. When you zoom out a little bit, it becomes more obscure, more opaque. And sometimes we feel like things are really efficient for ourselves when we make a change. But if we do that in isolation, we miss a lot of the downstream and we end up making more process inefficiencies for others. So what about mathematically, right? How might this look mathematically? So don't make fun of me, but I did make a map about making maps. So this is, let's call it brainstorming. Okay, so this map here is if you were to, let's say, brainstorm in the first phase on, let's get some ideas and just get them out quickly. I got 3 staff members here and I got them each for 30 minutes. So it cost me a total of 90 minutes to get this process kicked off. We jump straight to an implement phase and we just say, let's get the solution in place. We've added now 5 minutes to our process. So let's say our process now runs, there's 10 staff and they do this 100 times and whatever this process is. Let's say it's reimbursements or requests for refunds or whatever the case is. You got 10 staff doing this 100 times. We've added 5 minutes to their process. We basically said, you need to now go in and check this Google form to make sure it's not duplicate or whatever. We felt like that was really efficient. It actually ends up adding 5 minutes to their steps, right? We've now created additional issues. We've created new fires that we then have to go create. So now this Google form, not everyone has access to it because some folks are on the health side and other folks are on the campus side, and there's these issues. So now we have to have another meeting, another quick brainstorming session where we try to now solve that problem. So all in all, 30 minutes, so 90 minutes for brainstorming, some amount of time for implementation, 5,000 minutes for running this new process we've now added. We've bloated our process by 5,000 minutes annually. And we've got 270 minutes to now fix the additional problem. So we've got, basically, we've added 89.33 hours. This is the total cost, if you will, of jumping to improve, of brainstorming and just getting some solutions. Let's think about the lean approach. Let's talk about, spend some time and define, measure, analyze, right? Often I hear, oh, we don't have time for that. I just need a solution. Okay, but let's take a look at it mathematically. I'm asking for a few more staff, a couple other SMEs. So let's talk about 5 staff. And I want more of their time, not just 30 minutes. I want 300 minutes. So I've asked for 10 times as much staff with 2 additional staff. I'm asking for 1,500 minutes total in order to go through the first phases of this process, right? In the improve phase, we find, based on our ideas, that we've saved 5 minutes. So we've not only addressed the issue, but we've saved 5 minutes. We were able to lean out our process by 5 minutes. Doesn't sound like that much, right? Just say 5 minutes. Times 10 staff, times 1,000 runs, 5,000 minutes. And then you should always do a control phase. So celebrate your successes, revisit, look at additional process improvement opportunities. So you take those 5 staff and you meet with them for another hour and you spend some time in control. You should spend more than that, but let's just say 300 minutes for a moment. So the net here is you've saved 53.33 hours. So it felt more efficient on the front end to just get ideas and put them in place, right? It's cheaper in that sense to just say, I need a solution, great, I have a solution now, we'll deal with the rest later. But you've bloated your process in that sense. If you go through and you define, you measure, you spend some time thinking about what is the current state, about understanding the cultures and the backgrounds of the folks that are doing the work, with lean methodology, you could potentially save, at least in this example, 53.33 hours. That's not the full story, right? If we were to compare those two side by side, you see that we would have added 89 hours versus saving 53 hours. That's 142 hours difference. So if you were to put these two side by side and say to a leader, hey, we're going to do this project. Do you want us to spend an additional 142 hours or, So hopefully you can kind of see, hopefully this helps tell a story. I'm trying to persuade you that jumping to improve can be costly in ways that we don't think about. All right, let me jump over to the presentation again here. Boop. All right, so what are you gonna do, right? How can we share our processes? Do I need to learn a new software? Do I need formal training? No, I mean, not necessarily, right? If the best you can do is to have an informational discussion with a few peers and scribble some notes on a piece of paper, then do that, right? But do so with these foundational concepts in mind. That's my advice. If anyone has questions for Tony, please put them in the chat window. I see this in the chat, so I do have it here glancing. So I'll address those in the end, I promise. So if you take these foundational concepts before you start a process change initiative with whatever tool set you use, I believe that you'll be much more successful, right? Now, when it comes to mapping, actually doing the maps, use whatever tools you and the folks you're working with are comfortable with, right? Now, if that's something like Visio or Lucidchart or ProMap, great, do that. But if you only have time or comfortability, let's say in a Word document or a Google document with some bullets, that's great also, right? Now, I'd even advocate for crayons and a napkin, right? What's important here is that you find a way to capture the information and share it out with others, right? Now, if right now we have little or no documentation, then what's better than that? Anything, right? Literally anything. So scan your napkins, email it to people, post it up in the break room, but don't get stalled just because you don't feel like you can do some polished, swim lane artifact. I'm trying to encourage you all that what's really important is that you build these relationships, that you build this awareness of process, that you share that knowledge with others. And there's no best way to do this, right? But I want you to look for a better way than what you currently have. So what can you do today, right? I would encourage you to start with a mindset, not necessarily a specific tool set. Think about a process that's unclear for you, right? Reach out to somebody who sits a step or two before or after you in that process. Ask them what their steps are. Ask what their day is like. Do it over a cup of coffee or something, right? Make it, not a formal, big to-do. Have a discussion. We all know how to do that, right? Don't approach that conversation, though, with a specific change in mind. Remember, you're not trying to change them or get them to buy into an idea. I would say start by asking for their experience and sharing yours, right? If they're open to it. If you want to practice mapping, there's lots of tools available. There's lots of videos and resources on the internet. It's great. It's a great thing to look at what you currently have. What current documentation do you have? And think about it in the sense of, does it make sense to you? Is it up to date? Would it make sense to someone else if they were to look at it? Do you need a resource like that? See if anything jumps out. Share it with people who are upstream and downstream and see if it resonates with them at all, right? So if you start mapping, so you have that discussion and you're ready to start putting crayon to napkin, right? Start by thinking of these questions. These have saved me a lot of angst and a lot of rework. In lean terms, when you're creating a map, you're creating a product for a customer, right? When you're creating a process map, the process of creating a process map is itself a process, right? It's kind of meta, little inception-y. So think about who you're building this resource for. Think about how they're going to use it. Think about what spaces or tools or terminology are they familiar with. Get their feedback as you're building it, not just their knowledge on how to do the steps, but show it to them and see if you can iteratively change and improve it. But also, really take some time to think about if it's the kind of resource that they would want. I'll tell you one last story today, unless there are more questions in the chat. I'll tell you one more story. We had created, early on in COVID, we were asked to create a video for self-testing for students. So they needed this in record time. Anyone who's ever made a video can tell you it is a lot of work. So we got students in, we had them self-administer, we wrote the script, we did the filming and the editing, and in record time, we made this product, and it was so good, you guys. I was so proud of it. And the nurses loved it. It was so good for us and for the nurses. But you know who hated it? Was the students that it was intended for. It didn't resonate with them. It was too dry. It was too clinical. It was so, just didn't click for them. I hear tell that one of them took our footage and created like a TikTok style video, and that resonated a lot better, and they ended up using something like that. So that was my bad. I did not follow my own advice at the time. Our hair was on fire. We were looking for a quick solution. We had a target in mind, and we directed straight for that without really thinking about or bringing in the students for whom we were trying to create this guide, this document. Right? So my goal today is hopefully to inspire you to start your process improvement journey if you haven't already, to share some mindsets and an approach as you navigate challenges. I want you to not jump to improve where possible. I want you to think about your starting point as a dialogue, and not a debate or an argument. I want you to understand as much as you can your process before trying to change the process. I want you to think of process mapping like telling a story. Now, you shouldn't tell your story without some introspection, but your story is not yours alone, right? The teammates, the people around you, the departments, the units, everyone has a role in this ultra complex organism we call the workspace. So if you remove the silos that reinforce our disconnection from our shared mission, just by telling your stories and learning from the stories of others, I believe and I have seen that you will reclaim your humanity. That's all my prepared remarks, if you will. I welcome any questions you have in the chat, and I will start with reading the first one that I see here. How many years has UC San Diego been on the CI journey? I mentioned jumping to solutions. Since UC San Diego has embarked on the continuous improvement journey, do we feel that employees are jumping to solutions less? So UC San Diego has been on I think it's about 7 years now. We've been doing various types of Lean Six Sigma. And as with any good culture change, it didn't happen overnight, and we're not done. It is continuous improvement itself, right? We are changing the way that we do the training. We're changing the way and trying to improve on the way that we support the community afterwards. We're trying to think of creative ways to keep folks engaged and keep them practicing and keep them sharing and keep this growing. But we're learning as we go. And we have thousands of staff members. We've trained a couple thousand, I think 3,000 now, at least at the yellow belt level. And I have seen folks starting to change when they think about things, whether they're jumping to improve. I've heard, anecdotal stories from people who share with me that they've really looked at the world with sort of a different set of eyes now, and that's been really exciting. I wonder sometimes if that's a biased sample because the people in my circles are the people who have taken this training, that sort of thing. So I'm always looking for ways to reach folks who haven't started this journey, who haven't maybe thought about this sort of approach. And I'm open to any ideas as always. I have one here that says, I really appreciate your thought process here. It seems debate and argument has become the cultural standard in the US. I wonder if there's any way back to centering dialogue in our day-to-day business, social, family, and all of it. This idea of culture change, whether you're talking about an organization of 10 people or a family of 300 people or a city of 1 million people or a country with several millions of people, right? I'm hopeful that if we start to exhibit dialogue and if we start to practice not jumping to solutions, that culture change will happen because people will see that and they'll appreciate it, and hopefully it'll spark in them and they will too start doing that, or they'll wonder how you're doing it, and they'll they'll come to one of these sessions. I'm always amazed when people want to hear what I have to say. Like, who the heck am I? As Tracy said earlier, I have a theater background, like, and now I'm helping people with process improvement, right? It's interesting, this journey, and the connection, if anyone's curious, the connection between theater and process improvement really is about people. It's about storytelling. It's about what are our motivations, what are the dramas, who are the major players, who are the characters here, what are the things that they don't see, that if they just knew this piece, oh, Hamlet would not have done that had he known, that sort of thing, right? And when you're an audience member, those things are very apparent to you. And that's kind of the eyes that I want everyone to have, is even if you're in the process, look at it as an audience member, as a participant, as a customer, as a stakeholder, and hopefully you'll see things you hadn't seen before. Other questions, comments, concerns, considerations, qualms, quandaries, queries, or conundrums, please drop them in the chat. Or Tracy, come on up.
Yeah, I have another one. So there are lots of different mapping software out there. Is there any reason why you prefer or like ProMap versus other applications, anything like that?
Okay. I always tell people there's not one ring to rule them all.
Yeah.
I like ProMap. We're rolling out ProMap to our campus. And it does something really cool that I haven't seen in other tools, where you kind of put a top level header and you almost think of it in terms of bullets, and it does the swim lanes and stuff for you, which I think is really cool. There's other stuff in there about lean tags and timings and other things. But it has its own quirks, just like any tool. I like to go to things like Lucid Chart when I'm doing certain kinds of process maps. Kind of hard to get into the specifics, but it really depends on where we are. And I often tell people, when you're going to go do a process map, again, one of my bullets was start by thinking about what are the tools that the people who are going to use this are going to resonate with, right? And if the folks that I'm working with are never going to look at the ProMap or are never going to look at the tool, I don't want the Lucid Spark to just, or the Visio to sit on the shelf. If they want something done in Google and that's what they're going to look at, and they tell me that, great, let's build it out in Google, right? Let's use Jamboard and let's use, Spark Notes or whatever it is. I'm willing and happy to do it there, because I want to create a resource when I'm mapping that they will leverage. Right?
Yeah, that's what I find too, is I tend to be software agnostic in general, because being a consultant, everybody uses something different. And, I've actually had a default to having a lot of my templates in Excel, Microsoft Office, because everybody has it and there's no barriers to getting it. And they're not always the best tools, but we're providing some tools. But I agree with you, Tony. What are people using? What are they going to be able to look at? What can they access? Absolutely. Good. So we have another question. Usually in organizations, we find departmental processes creating silos, say sales, quality, HR, etc. Wondering if you can share an organizational process which enables to unite the silos, and also, if possible, share a few best practices in this regard.
So I'm not 100% sure I understand the question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna take a stab. I think what I'm hearing is that some processes are designed almost to reinforce the silos. Think of like the elevators, right? Sometimes we think or believe, or there's some policy or there's some cultural rationale for why you shouldn't know the process, or have there's a clean break between your process and this other group's process. I don't want to encourage people to go and tear the walls down. But that's what I want to do. In the sense that if somebody tells you like this process is siloed from that one, and these are just clearly separate out from each other, these are still just people, and you're still welcome to have a relationship with that person, in the sense that you can still ask them, tell me a little bit more about what you do, and in doing that, it's a little guerrilla tactics, it's a little like subversive. But I've seen it work. And here's something else that I'll say about that, is that if you understand more about the process, even without having to change it, you get better in your role and the other person gets better in their role. Sometimes it's because you now understand more the why, or you're able to kind of change little bits of timings about just how you're doing the thing. But so often it happens because now you're more clicked in with your purpose, right? You sort of reclaim your humanity. I'm no longer just a gear moving a thing just because somebody told me to do it this way. You now have a better understanding of, I do this because it supports students, because this person uses it to do this thing. So a lot of times, again, just that sharing, that understanding, that discussion, that dialogue helps you reclaim, your purpose and why you're there.
Definitely. I'll share one example too. So obviously, some of you know that I teach at UC San Diego as well. I teach the public green belt, and I've been doing it for 8 years. And for many years, we were only having 1 or 2 classes per semester. Now we have up to 4 green belts running at the same time. So there's a lot of, demand, and people seem very interested in wanting to get their green belt. But I will tell you, you have to do a project in the class. And the number one process I see
is it onboarding
to class is, do you know what, Tony?
Onboarding. Is it onboarding?
Employee onboarding. So when Fassi or Facel, I'm sorry, I probably butchered your name and I apologize for that. He was asking about a process that maybe can unify. Well, that to me is a great example of a process that should be unified, right? There are so many departments typically involved in that. It's a very important process because it's a new employee and we want to make sure that they get everything they need. But it is complicated. I mean, they have to have, access to the building. They have to have the right IDs. They have to get their computer. They have to get a laptop or phone. They have to get the right access. There's like 13 deliverables within the first 2 weeks of them being there. And I could see why it could get very complicated. And it's, oh, by the way, an invisible process, right? Mm-hmm. Something that could be super helpful for mapping. But to me, it's the number one process because there's so many complications. And if people approach it right, they can help unify some of the silos going on there, recognizing that it's a cross-functional process. But it's crazy. Like almost every semester, I have employee onboarding as someone working on their project. And it's always a different root cause. It's always a different root cause. And it's amazing. So anyway, maybe that helps. I hope that helps. Okay. Well, let's see. I don't see any other questions, so I'm just going to make a few more announcements. And so one of them is I just put the link in for the next podcast our latest podcast that I announced at the beginning with Billy Taylor. The new webinar link will be coming out very soon. And then, of course, I do have to do a plug for UC San Diego's Process Palooza. It is their 5th year that's going to be running in 2023. If you haven't been to the Process Palooza next year in 2023, it is going to be live in person again after 2 years of being virtual. And so don't know if any of you have gone to the Process Palooza. I don't believe there's any cost to it, right, Tony? It's free.
You know what? I'm not certain. Let me go check and I'll drop the link to that.
Yeah, I'm almost positive it's free. And they have, let's see, the last time we did it live, there was, I want to say between 1,000 and 1,200 people showed up for Process Palooza. And even with the virtual, it's been like 800 people registered, 800 to 1,000 people registered all over the world. And also really important, it's a great opportunity to get involved in the Process Palooza competition, which is a competition of teams to try to improve your process at UCSD. So it's super fun, high energy. You get to utilize the tools, and so you learn, you become better at it, and you get prizes. Why wouldn't you want that? So I'm going to be emceeing it. Partially, and then also we're going to have a debut. We there's a song that we're going to be doing a little song at Process Palooza 2. It's called I like lean tools, And so you got to come. It's fun. And so we've got a couple comments about Process Palooza in the chat. A couple people have said that they've gone, and there's a couple people that are organizing it too. So anyway, if you have any questions about that, let us know. Tony, you got any final comments about that you want to share with our audience before we close this up?
I mean, I'm grateful to everyone who attended, who stuck out this long, and, you know, including the people who are watching the post recording. If you got this far along, congratulations and thank you. And, you know, feel free to reach out if, you know, you have any thoughts or questions, find me on LinkedIn. And, you know, happy to chat. Love this stuff.
Thank you, Tony. You're always a pleasure to work with. I always love engaging with you. I love it that I had the pleasure of attending Tony's Yellow Belt that they do to the students or to employees, and it was super high energy. So you're a kindred spirit in that way. Just love what you do. It's pretty obvious, and you make it fun too. So
thank you.
Always nice to have you in our community.
Happy to be a part of it. It's super exciting.
So thank you, Tony, for coming. Yeah. Thanks everyone for coming. We love it. Happy holidays, everybody. And we will see you in 2023. Bye-bye.